welcome back. Today we have Stuart Frankel with us. Stuart is the CEO and co-founder of Narrative Science. Stuart leads the company's strategy and corporate vision, focusing on how customers can achieve better business outcomes by implementing artificial intelligence. Prior to Narrative Science, Stuart was the president of the performance division of DoubleClick and was a member of DoubleClick's senior management team until the company was sold to, guess who? Google. Earlier in his career, Stuart was both a practicing attorney and a CPA. Stuart earned a BS from Miami University and a JD from Vanderbilt University. He is a two-time finalist for the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year and was named to Crain's Chicago Business Tech 50 list. He is a regular contributor to industry discussions related to the future of work, technology innovation, and entrepreneurship. Thanks for joining us today, Stuart.
Great to be here, Darius. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So, you know, in reading your bio, it's interesting that you started your career as an auditor with a Big Four accounting firm, got your CPA, which is interesting to me because I was at KPMG, got my CPA, worked in audit. So I often get this question, well, how do you end up in AI, right? So I kind of want to pose that same question to you. How do you go from auditor to AI founder?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. It is not a straight line. It's probably, hours talking about how that happened. I became a CPA in large part because I took an accounting class in college, my first one, and I did well, and other people didn't do well, and I thought, well, if I can do. If I, can have the aptitude for this, I might as well keep going. And then all of a sudden, I was a senior and I was graduating, and wound up sort of getting on that kind of career placement path at large universities, and went to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers. And when I look back, it's probably one of the best moves that I have made in my career. Truly, even though I spent only 3 years there, it allowed me to really make that transition from college with a large company, get lots of training. You've been in that business, you get to look at lots of different companies, and you get to see the inside of these companies. And in that experience probably planted the seed for me one day to, ultimately start my own company. And, there were lots of steps between then and where I am today, but truly, within a couple of years of graduating college, I knew at some point that I would want to start a business. Of course, I took a detour and became a lawyer and first, my mom still asks me what I'm going to do when I grow up. But it's been it's been a collection of very good experiences that make a lot more sense when you look at them in reverse, but probably not a lot of sense if you predicted my career trajectory, right when I was, 20, 21 years old.
Yeah, very interesting. And I imagine it was a lot easier to explain that you were an auditor to your family versus, I work in artificial intelligence. Like
I will still occasionally tell people I'm a lawyer if I want to just avoid the topic of, what I'm doing now and AI and everything else that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into what you all are doing at Narrative Science. I mean, as you think about your customer base, what is the core problem that they have, and then the traditional solution that they would use to solve that?
Yeah, so we've really evolved the business. Let me just talk a minute or two about our history, because I think it provides really good context to answer the question that you just posed. We've been around for about 10 years. And so when you think about companies that are in the AI space or focused on AI technologies, we've actually been around for a while. And we're focused on data, what we call data storytelling. So taking data, analyzing it, and then rendering all of that with our software into plain English stories. So think about an analyst taking a bunch of data, analyzing it, writing up a report, and sending it to her boss or her colleagues or a customer. That's what our technologies do. And when we started the company, we really started it with this technology, this kernel of technology that we got from Northwestern University. So I started the company with two computer science professors from Northwestern who had developed a prototype of what ultimately became the first version of our technology in a class. And as I got to know them through a mutual acquaintance, I really became interested in what they were doing, particularly as it impacted or potentially could impact the way that people would get the benefit of data down the road. So even 10 years ago, lots of talk about data. This was when the phrase big data was, pretty hot.
Yeah.
Analytics and BI tools were really exploding during this time. But we looked around the ecosystem, and I had in prior roles a fair amount of experience working with large amounts of data and going through business intelligence platform implementations and seeing all of the challenges of that, but also understanding that different people consume information in very different ways. Right. And the idea that everybody in the world would be able to become a business analyst or a data analyst or a data scientist and learn these complex tools, we thought that was crazy. And we thought it would be easier for us to teach computers to communicate to us in our language than it would be to teach everybody in the world to, have experience and learn these complex tools. So we started the company with that as a thesis. And then, it's interesting to start a company with the technology first as opposed to the problem.
Right.
Right. So you're an investor and that's probably not what they teach you in Startup 101. You really focus on a problem, and then you look at applications or solutions that could potentially solve that problem. But we started with this technology, and particularly at this time, there were some interesting technologies that were being developed in labs and universities and things like that. So we were happy to be able to tap into this. We first applied our technology to really areas of digital transformation in large companies. We said, what could this technology do? Well, it can automate and it could augment the activities that analysts or really anybody in an organization were undertaking to go from data to report. And so think of that weekly report that somebody has to generate every week, and they've been doing it for years. We can automate those types of activities. And as we started to work with large companies, and we're really fortunate, we've got about 150 large enterprises that we work with, we started to more and more focus on BI and analytics, and our technology, as it grew and as it evolved and the market really started to embrace it, moved closer and closer to solving similar problems that BI and analytics applications purport to solve. And so how did we go after that market? Well, the first place that we went after is the BI tools themselves, and thinking about, you've got all of these applications sitting on the desktops of knowledge workers now. So whether it's Tableau or Microsoft Power BI, or just pick your solution, but the utilization of those tools is still relatively low. And we thought we could combine what those applications do with what we do, going from data to analytics to language, and create just a better experience and hopefully improve the utilization of those tools. And so we built native integrations to every leading BI application or platform, and have now integrated it, natively with Tableau and Power BI and MicroStrategy and Click and just a host of other companies, so that users of those tools not only get dynamically generated visualizations when they're looking at their data, they also get dynamically generated narratives that do the analysis and explain to the user what they're looking at when they look at a chart or a graph. And that was really our first direct connection to pretty big ecosystem. BI and analytics, about a $30 billion a year market, growing relatively quickly and expected to grow for the foreseeable future. So we said, look, this is a good place for us to be. And we started feeling really comfortable, being a part of this broader ecosystem. As we spend more and more time with our BI partners, though, we realized that, and when we look back, this is so obvious, of course, this is always the case, but the notion that any application could be the right application for every person, right. Every persona, just doesn't make sense, right? Well, dashboards, which has become really the way that data is presented to everybody, is the thing that people are expected to use. But we all, again, going back to what I said earlier, we've got different ways that we consume and retain information. And so we said, what if we could create a different consumption experience for data and analytics? What if we left those BI and analytics tools, which are incredible in many ways, for the people who actually need them, for the people where their day job is in fact looking at data and analyzing data, but we reimagined that experience for the everyday worker, for the business worker. And so we rolled out a product fairly recently, within the last year, called Lexio, which is in fact that reimagined analytics experience. And so the idea is that users, they would be able to take advantage of all the infrastructure and all the data that's sitting in large companies, but depending on who they are and what they do, they might have a different consumption experience for that information. And that's ultimately what we're focused on. We believe that BI tools as they stand today underserve most people in an organization and just don't work for a big group of people in a company. And our reimagined experiences, we believe, really fills that gap and solves that problem.
Yeah, which is very interesting. I mean, even in my experience, I'll go back to investment committee meetings where I was at a private equity firm. Most of the folks on that particular team were Wharton grads, numbers driven. Let's talk about, I'm going to show you a sheet. All it's going to have is numbers, no explanations. Let's learn the story through the numbers first, right? Which was a different approach that I had seen before and after. That where there's, my buddy works for a firm where, let's write up an entire memo, which is primarily words, and what the story is supported by the numbers. So it's kind of to your point about different people processing information differently. Some people let's look at the data. Let's look at the data. But there's also a story behind the data, and someone else may say, let me hear the story first, and let's let the data confirm the story that I'm hearing or seeing.
Yeah, that's right. And the first example that you gave, though, where you are sitting around and got spreadsheets or walls of numbers and some other application, you're still engaged in data storytelling if you think about it, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's not just sitting there in silence taking this stuff in. There has to be some normalization of the analysis of the data that everybody is looking at. And you might do that through conversation, right? But that is in essence storytelling. And we've just automated that process because we think we can, for most people, skip that exploration step.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And so I guess as you think about, you're sitting on top of these BI tools, your customers are primarily looking at the BI tools for data. I guess how did you alluded to who you serve, but I'm curious about how did you specifically select that particular market? And then could you walk us through maybe a use case for a customer that you have now, for exactly what someone would be doing with your tool and how they would engage with your tool?
Yeah, sure. Well, so going back to what I said a few minutes ago, we were first focused on really digital transformation. So helping these large, typically companies that have been around for a long time, automating and augmenting these rote reporting activities. And that business went well for us. We started working with companies like USAA and Deloitte and MasterCard and many other companies. And they ran the gamut really of use cases. Often it was taking some type of operating report, for example, that talked about inventory levels or sales activity, and just automating that report. Well, as we worked with these companies, we just got exposed to more and more things that they were doing and how they were thinking about data. and a lot of them were either already customers of these BI companies or were thinking about becoming customers of these BI companies. And many of them said to us, hey, how can you work with these tools so that we could have a just more robust experience, information consumption experience. And so, that is really how it started. The other thing, which I think is important, for people listening, particularly entrepreneurs, I mentioned we started with a technology and then we figured out the problem that we were solving. You also need to find a market that's big enough to support what we're trying to do. And so when we looked around and we looked at the adjacencies, we said the closest thing to us really is BI and analytics. So let's just plant a flag there and go there. And so when we developed our product Quill, this integration with these BI tools that I mentioned earlier, it was a pretty natural evolution of both our product offering as well as something we could come and bring to our existing customers because they knew us, they knew what our capabilities were on the sort of early side of our business, and we're obviously really intrigued and interested in extending that to a pretty important part of their business infrastructure, these BI and analytics tools. And so that's what led us there. In terms of use cases.
Well, if I could just jump in really quickly, because I want to make sure I understood a point that you made. It sounds like as you started off in the digital transformation space, what you were really doing, it sounds like it was more consulting, right? So you're consulting these clients on different ways that they can go through digital transformation, and via consulting and seeing a large number of customers that have issues related to problems that you could potentially solve through data, through artificial intelligence, you're able to come up with a solution for a problem that you already knew existed.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's no question that early, phase of the business involved a lot of discovery work with our customers. While we had technology that did this work, it was still it's configurable, and we would need to work with our customers to make sure that they had the right data, to make sure that the use cases were well defined, that they understood who the audience would be, for example. So you're absolutely right. There was definitely a consulting component to what we did in the early days, but over time there really were repeatable use cases that emerged. One of the big areas for using that technology is in the area of institutional portfolio commentary. So for asset managers, mutual funds, these organizations have to report on the performance of their investments, of their funds. So performance analysis and attribution analysis, and it's time consuming, and it typically takes expensive people. And so a typical mutual fund might take 20 days after the end of the quarter to write up and publish this analysis. Well, our technology can do that in seconds at the end of the quarter. And so not only do you save time and save money, but you actually can create a better experience for those end customers because the information is much more timely. And over time, sort of different yet related use cases emerged. And a big part of that early business was working with financial services organizations.
Very interesting. And along those lines, when you're speaking to customers, are there metrics that you speak to as it relates to ROI, or that you use in kind of those customer conversations to indicate value?
Yeah. So yes, absolutely. I think that there are unfortunately those customers who blindly buy technology are few and far between now. So we are constantly sort of thinking and talking about the prospective ROI before somebody starts using our technology, and then sort of coming back along the way and understanding what the actual ROI is. There are a few different ways when you think of our technology suite. There's a few different ways to think about return against the investment that you're gonna make. Some of it is cost reduction or reallocation of costs. So if you've got a $100,000 analyst where all they're doing is generating that same daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly report, and that can be automated. Mm-hmm. You can free up that person to actually do higher value activities. So about 65% of a typical analyst's time now is spent on reporting. Not a very good use of somebody that's got that capability, who's making that kind of, who's making that kind of money. So there's certainly a cost reduction component of the return. We work with companies in a number of different areas. One of the areas we work in is risk and compliance. So large companies, as you know, it doesn't matter what industry they're in, they're always subject to an increasing number of laws and regulations. Often they have to do reporting. Often that has a narrative component to it. And so we have found a couple of spots within risk and compliance in large organizations where our technology is used to augment the compliance process, right? The creation of the reports that are needed to submit internally or to some type of regulatory body. And there, it's about fine avoidance. It's about not getting into trouble. And the numbers can be pretty dramatic when you start to look at these individual compliance use cases. By filing something on time, for example, right, when you're talking about anti-money laundering laws and regulations, the penalties can be severe. And so if we can help reduce the likelihood that somebody's going to get a penalty because we can increase their compliance, we love those deals, right? Because they pay for themselves very, very quickly. And then the third category, which is really the hardest category, it's probably the softest dollars when you think about it, is enabling frontline people, so people who are dealing with customers or on the factory floor, dealing with inventory levels and manufacturing processes. If we can help them be more data driven and do their job better, so that they can do it faster, they can do it with higher quality, sort of pick the metric, then we can often show that without our technology, they're missing a pretty big opportunity. Darius, every employee at every level is now expected to make data-driven decisions. Right. And I think with good reason. There's no question that data, because it's so widely available, should be an input into the decision-making process. But if they're not using the tools that you've given them, it doesn't matter. Right. And so we can either bolt on to an existing tool to increase the utilization or give them something new that they use and start to adopt, then we can just enable that data-driven decision-making to a much wider group of people. So you wind up getting a return then on your data infrastructure investment.
Got it. Very interesting. And so you mentioned engagement. I'm curious about how the end user, right, someone sitting within an organization actually engages with narrative science, right? What's the UI? What's the experience that they go through in order to produce these reports and get the ultimate value out of the product?
Yeah. So there's really three different ways, or I think I would categorize them this way. One is you get a static report. So there's the flash report that gets sent out every Monday morning. And I'll give you a sort of an anonymous example. We were with a very large retailer, and every GM and every department manager in every store, there are about 4,000 U.S. stores, every Monday morning gets a report on the activity in their stores, and it highlights trends and anomalies and things that they might want to look at. That's a static experience, and it fits into their workflow. So it might be in some proprietary portal. It could be in a CMS that somehow gets distributed. Could get sent via the email. That's one way. The other way is through a BI tool. So you log into your BI tool, and our what we call an extension to BI tools is easily integrated. Either it's there already for you, or it's something that you can download and just sort of connect to your existing BI instance. and you're just in the tool that you've either come to know, or you're in a tool that maybe you should have come to know, but now maybe it's a little bit friendlier because you're getting language along with with the pictures. And then finally, our newest product, Lexio, is a very consumer-like experience. So think Twitter or think Apple News, where information is being delivered to you in the way that you're accustomed through consumer applications, right? So imagine, if the consumer experience for whatever was like the typical enterprise software experience. It'd be
terrible.
Absolutely terrible. If Netflix, if you navigated your movie selections by downloading a giant spreadsheet and sorting and building pivot tables and things like that, the Netflix experience wouldn't be nearly as good. So we've tried to create an experience that's much more natural for the way that we consume information, in other areas of our life. There's also a lot of collaborative features. You can comment on certain stories, send those comments to your colleague. The colleague will get pinged, and you can start to have a dialogue about the information that is presented through Lexio. There's a great mobile experience. As you probably know, dashboards, they make more sense on a big screen when you're staring at it. Maybe you got a few people around a table or a desk looking at that screen. And that form factor is quite old. It's about 40 years old. It's been about 40 years since dashboards really sort of burst onto the scene as the way that people consume data. But 40 years ago, we were all just working in an office. And if we were lucky enough to have a computer, an early PC, it was a big clunky desktop in a very different world than we live in today. Today, we're mobile. Even in the office, we're mobile. Now that many people have gone to a distributed workforce, it even amps up the need to have a different experience than a very kind of older dated experience. And so,
which is interesting because now it's look, send me let's call it a tweet here. I can read in 140 characters what this is, high level what it's about, but then I can also drill in, right? I can drill in and get the full report and all the details inside of it.
That's right. You nailed it. Absolutely. You get a little snippet of information, and then if you want to go deeper, you go deeper. If you have questions, you can ask them right from that experience and get answers back. And, again, we think in sort of the way that we're working today in particular, we're going to continue, I believe, to be in a distributed work world for the foreseeable future. I'm not going out on a limb, obviously. But I think that people need new experiences and need new tools that have contemplated the world of software that we live in today, not the world that we lived in a few decades ago.
Absolutely. And so, very curious about, as you're producing these reports, right? You're writing up a report, it looks exactly like it's been written by a human, right? I'm curious about, where you get the data to initially see those algorithms that drive that output.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example of how Lexio works. Lexio can connect to just about any data source. So sometimes we have direct connections. Salesforce is a great example of that. If you're a Salesforce user, you come into Lexio, you give us your Salesforce credentials, we suck in all of that data, and then we start giving you these dynamic stories really right away. So within a couple of minutes of having access to your Salesforce data, Lexio is just going to work. And it's designed to do the types of reporting that we expect most people want. So with respect to sales, we want to understand how's the pipeline, how are bookings, what deals are stalled in the pipeline, those types of things. And so we know right off the bat that if it's sales data, here are the types of things that you're looking for. And over time, as you use it and we get access to more and more data, the system starts to personalize itself more for you. And so it'll run different types of analysis, for example, based on either your persona, who you are, or your historical usage of Lexio.
Yeah.
And so we always like to start, though, by saying, let's have Lexio just run a bunch of analytics, typical stuff. Let's look at changes over time, and then start taking the data that we collect from usage and create a better experience.
Got it. And generally, when you're talking to a customer, are they interested in understanding, hey, this is driven by AI, or is it a different kind of conversation where you're purely speaking to the outcomes? And so what I'm really trying to understand is AI important to the customer?
I love this question, and I wish we knew each other. You could have asked me this every year over the last 10 years. The answer really has changed pretty dramatically. When we first started, and really for, I'd say, the first 5 years of our life, AI was very much a part of the discussion. It was very buzzy, it was very hot, and people wanted to know, is this AI or not AI? And there were lots of debates as to what is AI and what is not AI.
Right.
We never really cared that much, to be perfectly honest. We just wanted to build tools that actually worked and that could actually solve real problems and get utilized by people. And so we always drove the discussion there. And then if somebody, particularly on the technical side, wanted to talk about how our technologies do their thing, then of course we would have those discussions. Today, when we have discussions with people, the only time AI comes up is when people want to understand, hey, can this thing just say anything, right? So if I'm going to distribute Lexio, for example, to everybody in my company, is it going to just start running its own analytics, its own way of looking at data, and start delivering information that might be not in the format we like, not focused on the right things? And so we've never really believed in a pure AI model for our technology, just turning it loose, shoving a bunch of data in, and then seeing what comes out. And so we have constrained things quite a bit. When you think about some of the things that I mentioned at the top of our conversation, compliance and weekly reporting and even sales reporting within our Lexio application, you kind of want to know what the universe of things that the software is going to do and come out with. Right now, that may not be the case when you have a group of analysts who are looking at an enormous amount of data, and their job is, hey, let's look at some trends that nobody's ever looked at before, or let's find correlations in the data that are, interesting, but nobody had time to explore these things. Most people don't do that in their job. Very few people do that in their job. They just want to know, is deal with Acme Trucking going to close in Q3 or Q4? And those are the kinds of things that we help them with. And so people want to understand how things work, but they're not so focused on I need to have AI or I need to not have AI.
They want more kind of, what's my outcome? And is that outcome relevant to my business?
That's right. Well put, right? So here's the problem, narrative science, that I'm trying to solve. Maybe you have some tools that can help me do that, but I probably have some other things over here, including people, that I'll throw at the problem as well.
Very interesting. And so generally, does the conversation start with someone on the technical side? My thought is, if it's starting with someone who's focused on the outcome, this is the business user who's really thinking about whether we should buy this product or not.
Yeah, in general, there's two kind of buyer profiles. One is the exactly what you said on the business side, and often it's a marketing leader or a sales leader or even a VP of operations. The second group, though, are in analytics functions. So I mentioned we work with large companies.
Okay.
Typically now a centralized analytics function, at least for the acquisition of technologies and implementing things like data governance and stuff that really is necessary to centralize. We're calling on those people as well. If there's a chief analytics officer, we'll call on that person. Typically, it's somebody else that sort of has those responsibility, but isn't necessarily titled that way. And what I can tell you, Darius, what's interesting, the interesting trend that's happened in the last couple of years on the analytics leader side, or even the pure IT side. Over the last few years, we've seen a pretty marked change, though, where those leaders are now under a lot of pressure. So the glory days of just spending a lot of money on building your infrastructure, I think, are over. I think there's more scrutiny being placed on these technology purchases now. And as we kind of continue in this depression, recession, whatever we want to call it, I think that scrutiny is going to increase. And so the utilization of existing stuff that these companies already have has really been brought to the forefront, that metric. And so the people on that side of the business are much more interested now in understanding what we do and whether our solutions could potentially fit in with what they're trying to do. And so that audience has been much more receptive. The analyst community, Gartner, has written a lot about the emerging trends in analytics. They came out with a report just in May of this year. Okay. They talked about the demise of the dashboard for the first time ever. And they mentioned that 75% of kind of analytics experiences in 5 years are going to be through data storytelling technologies. Now, that's one research firm and it's one prediction, but I can tell you from where we were years ago, that's a really encouraging thing to see.
Yeah, very interesting. And so I know we got to be conscious of time here. Last question, if you could go back to 2010, knowing everything you know now, anything you would do differently, or better yet, what would those first, let's say, 90 days look like?
I'm not sure I would do the first 90 days any differently, just given sort of the way that we rolled out of an academic, institution. I think that I would have spent more time thinking about existing markets as opposed to creating a new market. When we started, we really described ourselves as a natural language generation technology company, and we mistakenly thought that right, that NLG is going to be this big market. As it turns out, NLG is just one tool in the toolbox, right? And I probably would spend more time just thinking about, hey, what is that industry that's already got billions of dollars of revenue flowing through it, and how can we fit within that industry? Now, we eventually got there when we landed in BI and analytics, but in retrospect, and I think every CEO probably feels this way, we could have gotten there faster.
Right. Very interesting. And that's very helpful insight there in terms of just thinking through, all right, well, we've got some technology here, but, what's the problem? That's the way we need to communicate that versus saying, we got this awesome deep learn. Yeah,
and I'll tell you, Darius, so it's tough. So we were talking about things like language is the next interface between people and machines in 2010. Before Siri was on the iPhone, before Alexa, before Google Now. And so we were really trying to kind of work our way through the world and really understand both the technology trends and the business trends and see where we could fit. And, we sort of bounced within reasonable parameters, kind of bounced back and forth a little bit, but definitely got there.
Awesome. Well, that's all we have for time, but this was very helpful. It looks like you guys are on a great path now. Love that you're based out of the Midwest in Chicago, my old stomping grounds before I came out here to Columbia. But thanks, Stuart. Thanks again for joining us, and look forward to chatting with you again soon.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Darius. Really appreciate it.